Shadowhawk, Dark Prophet, whatever you want to call me. This is Grant, okay? And this is kind of a school project slash just something I wanted to do. Look, this is the topic of this video is something that's very, very important to me and important to most Americans nowadays, most millennials. Counterculture, the greatest force, probably in my opinion, in American culture throughout our history has been our matter of debate, are going against the status quo, going against what is normal, going against what is normally acceptable, and some things are not some things are unhealthy, some things are bad, but sometimes it's good to have order, and that there are things we should always keep. But there are things that, look, for ever since the 60s, the history of this counterculture goes all the way back to the 60s, and let's begin this. In the 50s, everyone was white supremacist. Everyone is a white supremacist government. Everyone had to be white, perfect family was perfect mom, perfect dad, perfect kids. You sat down, you watched dinner, and I mean, it was age of conformity. It was an age of ideas, of suppressing of ideas. It was an age of religious intolerance. It was an age of racial intolerance. It was an age of just pure blown white supremacy and conformity of ideas. And this is going at the time of the Cold War, when anyone who fought differently the American government, who said something that was anti-government or anti-political, was a communist, and he hunted them down and shot them. And this all started really with being a faith music, like faith-based music, like with black churches and stuff like that. And Elvis began this whole concept of, hey, let's be true to our faith, let's be peaceful, let's love one another, let's not hate people for being different, And that's what really started. Rock and roll at the time was, trust me, it was not rock and roll as we know today. They called it devil music because it was embracing this whole be yourself, be happy, don't be all, stiff and shit. And people loved it. And then that's music was the beginning of faith-based music. Faith in general is what started the many of the counterculture movements, like the Black Power movement, the going against white government and white supremacy, going against Jim Crow laws, going against the second-class citizen status of people who are black, Native American, or Indian, or Hispanic. That was, you had to be white American. I mean, you went to a white church. Black people weren't allowed to go to white churches. Black people weren't allowed to go to certain movie theaters. They weren't allowed to go places. It was racial segregation. There was hate. There was the KKK, and there's also the Native Americans who were losing their culture. They were being forced to live in the ghettos, and they were losing who they were, and they were falling to poverty and death. And then the two respective movements gained a new focus. Spirituality and the importance of their culture, not the way American culture, played a huge role in this. Martin Luther King was a great man, very spiritual. He felt like Jesus did. I mean, I believe in God. I really do. I think spirituality is what started the modern day of counterculture. The 60s was the birthplace of modern day counterculture against white supremacist America, and it's still going on. It's taking on new forms, and it's still there, and I think we kind of could bring past those moments back from it. Instead of going with all peace and love, make it a little aggressive, make it really raunchy, make it music. And that's what we've been doing these past 2 decades. We've been using music and media and just plain old frickin' F you to the government to say, hey, we don't want you controlling everything we say and do. We want to make our own choices. We want to do what we feel is natural. Or, hey, you don't speak for us. You don't speak for God or whatever. You just want to be yourself and live the life that you feel is right, and do what your conscience is telling you, and not live in an age of racial suppression, and not this whole image of the white rich status quo and everyone else is subordinate. And the concept is the government exists for the people, not the other way around. The government should be a thing of protection and a place where we can be ourselves and we can feel protected, not controlled. And that was what started in the 60s. Martin Luther King was a great visionary. He was a Baptist minister and very good Christian, in my opinion. He asked for nonviolent appeal. He protested. They stood against, no, I will not do that. I will not move. The bus boycotts, the Harriet Tubman, they were going against, they weren't violently protesting at all. There were violent protests, but usually his protests, his leadership was very unviolent, for almost the most part. There were many chances where black people got angry, but Martin Luther King was never directly responsible for it, in my opinion, for the most part. And these Christians, they sang the gospel. They weren't like white churches who just you went in there because you felt you had to. They were alive, Christianity to people like the Black Power movement and hippies. They were living by example. They were living life to the extreme. They were living while they were alive. They weren't living because they were following God, not some white president. They weren't following JFK. They weren't doing that. They were following they're being spiritual, living in the woods, being free, living who they are, following their spirituality, being spiritual, not having anything to do with government, not having anything to do with the rest of the world. They're living, in many cases, with their spirituality, with God. It was a great thing. They were living in communes. They gathered, they sang, they danced, they prayed, they meditated. It was a great time. Many of these hippie movements, people acknowledge they thought the hippies were communists. They thought they were ungodly, red people. They weren't. A lot of them were Christians. A lot of them were just people who used art. They were artists. They smoked dope, but it was different. Back then, marijuana wasn't the street drug it is today. It wasn't this whole polluted drug. It wasn't this street thing. Even marijuana is a reflection of the history of counterculture from the time. Marijuana culture to them was not drug culture. Well, it could be. There's definitely a lot of LSD mixed in, but it was more natural. Back then people grew marijuana. They didn't do it for quote unquote getting high or destroying themselves, or even like just being fuckboys. They didn't do it the same way people do it now, where they just want to go in a club, get stupid, be destroyed. They did it to think artistically. They did it to enjoy music. They did it to get some great ideas. They did it just to relax, unwind, and relax. In a lot of ways, marijuana back then was a lot better than alcohol. I'll tell you that much. I believe the firm that marijuana rarely kills anyone. If you do it right in recreational purposes, and you do it with a smart mind and moderation, and you do it the right weed, all you do is you get happy, you get positive, and you can just unwind and relax and not lose your sense of self. You can just people back then, college students can handle marijuana very differently. Although the friends I have nowadays, particularly two very good friends of mine, they are hippies. Hippies are different than druggies. Hippies look at modern day marijuana users like a bunch of fuckboys. They look at a bunch of people who freaking get high to be destroyed and for no purpose. But back then, true hippie like communes who are very spiritual, I'm not saying it was spiritual. They did to relax, unwind, and meditate and contemplate shit, and they did to think artistically. Hey, Grateful Dead, they followed the caravans. They're very loving people. Many of these hippies were very committed couples. They were very committed. They raised their kids right. A lot of these hippies still were very outspoken. They were very for government. They were for democracy. They weren't for totalitarianism. They were for a government that was guided under a spiritual sense that everyone has a right. Everyone is American. Everyone is a good person. Everyone deserves a right to be heard. They were democracy, and they used dance. They used art, and this was good art. The Grateful Dead, some of the best songs in the '70s that told true stories, like American Pie, and shit like that. I'm pretty sure, a lot of them were on probably marijuana when they did. They're probably on hippie weed. That's what it was. It was a kind of drug that you did to think artistically, to enjoy music, to enjoy Yellow Submarine. It was this artist time. It was this dude, whoa, this is so cool. It made things way more awesome to enjoy. Music was way more important. It's not that they're stupid. It's just things hit your senses way more directly when you're high. It doesn't mean you're stupid. It just means you're thinking more artistic, and you can get artistic, and that's what they did. They did it to be themselves. It wasn't, and back then marijuana wasn't full of all the stuff it is now. The reason marijuana, this is the connection thing here. If you look at this time, when people like college students, that they did to think artistically, they didn't do to destroy themselves. Some people they did just to the whole drug culture, the '60s, Beatles, all the moving colors. It was a pretty cool time. It wasn't like nowadays where you get all this stupidity you get for dumb ideas. Well, it was a time of art and can be used for artistic thinking. It was a time of, hell, and it was a time of recreation. And it was grown naturally. They didn't put stuff in. But white culture nowadays uses marijuana. This is unspoken. It's kind of a thing. Rich white people made weed legal in around the time from 30s and 60s. 60s it was a little more lax, but eventually by the time the true rich white Republican movement started, Nancy Reagan, they used weed. They made weed legal so they could use as an excuse in the 30s. Up to this had been perfectly fine. It was legal then prohibition, And look, I really like stoner culture. I like hippie culture, and thinking that artistic stuff, it was part of it. And it was good stuff. And some people were just completely normal, they weren't druggies. But when you look at the way you treat a certain plant, when you look at the way you treat a certain form of recreation, the culture, if we look at this differently, they did it for artistic, they did it for fun, they did it for art, they did it unwind. Whereas now it's become this destroying brain fuck thing. And in 30s, it became a thing for the white government, rich white people, to racially profile African Americans, Mexicans. They used it as a way to keep Mexicans out of America. And they completely created like all these laws, all these systems, even though there's been no scientific tests, no true cohesive scientific tests on the effect of marijuana on a large scale basis. And there'd been no research, and no research in its actual effects, and that was like, it was on par with heroin, and it's not. And the rich white government used this as a way to keep Mexicans out. And eventually, when we look at the way, and if we really get into this, when rich white politicians make something illegal, when they use something as a way of lowering a certain denomination, a certain group, we saw this in the 60s. They used things like hippies as a way to refer to people who were ungodly, and they used symbols and they used examples to separate themselves from people. They use themselves to create a status quo. When you use something that's completely harmless or something that doesn't really do anything, and you use it to demonize a group of people and create this standard of living, the standard of what normal is, to justify their rule, that's where you get the current system, that government, what the current government is, and what counterculture is. And now, here's the thing. Once the white government, here's the thing. American government uses the law and uses its symbols and what perfection is and what normal is. They use it to create their law, and this is what the 60s movement was. In itself, we are going against your statement. We are living our lives as we see fit. We're living our lives as we feel comfortable, and we're not doing it your way, we're doing it our way. And it was peaceful by protest. The Black Power movement was also like this. Hippies and African Americans, the Black Power movement in general, they're very peaceful. They're speaking of gospel, of everyone is God, okay? Everyone has God in them. We are God's children. We are all normal. We are all human beings. And that no one group has a right to express the other. And many of these times, these were ended with violent protests. A lot of these peaceful demonstrations, we don't want this war. We don't like Vietnam. Vietnam was a war in which was very highly unpopular. It was very similar to the Iraq War. It was a war that had no true purpose. We were just doing it for political reasons. Although I do admit we had to be in Iraq, but Vietnam and Iraq are very similar in the fact that it was a very unpopular war, and people went in and the soldiers came back with terrible lives, and these people were being drafted. They were being forced into a war they didn't want to fight. And people fought against this war. We don't want to be part of this war. And many communities, Christian and hippie, whatever, left. They fled. They weren't, some were dash robbers, yes. Some were just living away from war. They were living away from this culture of war and living a natural, normal life of just peace and love. And that's what it was. It was fighting war and hate with love and peace for what we believe in. Nonviolence. And eventually, there's another power movement at the time. That was the Red Power movement, where Native Americans, in the Trail of Broken Treaties, the Native Americans finally rallied together and they formed a cohesive front. And during the 60s and early 70s, there was several instances that were coincisive and they were all linked. The Native Americans literally, on the Wounded Knee reservation, rose up in defiance against the American-sponsored reservation government. The Native Americans revolted, they fought back. And, it became a revolt. Literally, the Native American militias formed. They revolted against the administration building. They revolted against the tribal administration. And this was backed by the white government. They were living terrible lives, and they They revolted, and this revolt gained them notoriety. The entire American military blockaded the reservation. And what happened? What happened was the Native American people, they revolted, yes. And then they stood up. This was a rallying point. Native Americans across the country, they joined this giant convoy, and they called it the Trail of Broken Tears, or Trail of Broken Treaties. I remember that now. And they revolted. They went this giant convoy across the nation to the United States Capitol, and they boycotted the entire. They didn't just boycott; they surged into the American Bureau of Affairs of Washington D.C. They broke in, rampaged it, and burnt down several documents. It was violent, but it got things done. Both these things working together were a series of events that got the Native Americans the attention they deserved. And within the 70s, it got back after a huge surge of popularity by the American people. They were acknowledged. They were given back their status as a people, and they were given back their status as reservations. And across the 70s, the entire Native American reservation system we have now was established. They have the right to self-rule. They are sovereign nations within the United States. The first time this has happened in American history. There are now nations within a nation. And these people, they govern themselves, they teach traditions. There's just reinsurgence of Native American pride, the resurgence of their rights as a people, reinsurgence as their right to govern themselves. And many, even spiritual, in many of these Native American reservations, there's a strong Christian, but native way, and they weren't being forced to follow their way. And this coincides with another significant event at the time, the Second Vatican Council. This is just where it acknowledges religion. American officials all across the world acknowledges people have a right to celebrate their religion, not in the way the white government persists, but as their culture persists. And this started a huge movement that is called the New Age movement. And there are several examples where it's not religions I agree with, but there was this new resurgence of spirituality in the 60s and 70s, where people were creating this, where people were suddenly refocused on spirituality. There was like several new cultures of spirituality popped up, and some are very good, some were very pragmatic, some were based on living to your culture but find the basic truths of your spirituality. And people across the world were finding new ways of expressing their culture. 70s, people were gaining pride, and African Americans were gaining pride. I mean, people were starting to celebrate their faith and whatever according to their culture. I mean, there was this new focus on racial rights, and this is the victory of the Rainbow Pride movement. And by the end of the 70s and early 80s, there was even this awakening of the homosexuals, that we were starting to present them in media, besides being, freaks. And they're not freaks. And homophobia was still there, but it was starting to, hey, maybe, we can't just ignore this. And the fact that in TV, people were starting to do things you never did before. Like Fonz, the biggest moment of the Fonz was Happy Days was when literally they're showing a realistic relationships. They're really going beyond the whole beaver shit. But in the 80s, the Cold War was finally coming to an end. It was. And Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan created this whole white supremacist movement, and the American government started becoming very supremacist. Now let's fast forward. The 90s, everything was pretty much fine. Culture was, we were coming up with new ideas. The internet came about. New technologies were coming out. By the way, the internet and main computer systems were created by former hippies, and I'm pretty sure that maybe they were on a little marijuana when they did this. Look, I don't judge it. It's there. It's not inherently bad. But look, eventually, this is when 9/11 happened. The entire nation cried out. The worst part of the most terrifying event in American history since World War II happened, where literally the entire American people were in panic because in the heart of New York, the capital of the world, some call it, the capital of the United Nations, the capital of much of the modern world civilization we know today, global civilization, entire international trade building was destroyed, and people united and cried, and people hugged their neighbor, and there's this new people grabbed each other. They wanted to believe in something. This is the first time as a nation we came together and mourned everyone in God's name. And here's the thing: if I'm using God, look, this is how I put myself in it. Eventually, what happened was we got George Bush, and what happened was he created a system where Muslims were responsible. Arabs were now seen as the enemies of America. They're seen as this unholy race. They're saying all Muslims, all people of Arab descent were terrorists. We were first time we were racial profiling. Again, and truly racial profiling. And before, we were just, it was a race we ignored. And America finally became this whole... Bush was kind of, in a lot of ways, a lot like Ronald Reagan. He started calling for war. He marshaled the troops. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. This war on terror began. And this is when my form of counterculture began, which wasn't this whole hippie, church thing. It was this really cool counterculture. It was Green Day. It was MCR. It was the birth of emos and goths, and people were starting to dress darkly. They're starting to say, fuck you, I don't want to live in your government. I want to live as I want to see fit. I want to live happily. I mean, it wasn't just peace and love. It was, fuck you, man. I don't want to live in your system. You know what? For the first time, people were saying, fuck you to the American president. For the first time, people were saying the American government is completely wrong. People were saying the American government is fucked. And people were seriously doubting the American government. And you had people like Stephen Colbert. You had this age of political comedians mocking the crap out of presidents. You had Stephen Colbert, Jon Stewart. You had Green Day saying American idiot. They're like saying, we live in the streets. We drink, we party. It wasn't just party. Media became a form. Pop culture. Pop rock, angst. Green Day. There was an age of political humor. It was an age of serious political debate. I mean, we started pushing for rights. I mean, to be in the age of counterculture that I loved and I grew up in, I still kind of honor and it's still there, and that we're still kind of living in today, is that we're living in this fuck you, I don't want to live like this. We lived in starting to fight for people's rights. We were fighting for everyone's the same. Let's be politically correct. Let's not call someone black. Let's call them African American. And a counterculture was important. People were using music. They were using it hadn't changed, but it was being done differently. People were pissed. They were getting pissed. It wasn't so much we want to be. It was an age of political revolution. I mean, people were using culture. I mean, games, modern technology had allowed us to express ourselves in such different ways than ever before. And counterculture to me is always that shadow. It's a shadow culture. It's a shadow civilization in the back of modern civilization. It's where you go. It's where people were being outcast. I mean, being outcast is a great thing. People were being themselves. I mean, what I see in the American government was that we were seeing so many parallels in our culture at the time. Pop culture, games, it was all pointing out that war is, what kind of future are we leaving for our kids? Global warming. We were living a future where we were destroying the environment. We were still destroying the environment, and that what kind of future we want the kids to live in. And the world keeps on getting more totalitarian by the day. The American government gained the right to monitor the American people. And they've been secretly doing this for about a decade until Snowden revealed the truth that the American government had been monitoring every single person, and they were just observing us, and they were observing everything we say and do. And this was, people started thinking now about this. Then this began the age of internet revolution, the age of internet pariah, A for Anonymous, a group I highly agree with that targets people who are destroying the world order, who are destroying world peace, who are destroying the human rights. These are the ultimate protesters. They literally wear the mask of Anonymous, the mask of Guy Fawkes. Something V for Vendetta started, which was revolt against the establishment, anarchy. Government, people are now more than ever saying that government is robbing people of their basic rights. Capitalism in America has become the rich versus the poor. People are increasingly losing their jobs. People are increasingly living in poverty. People are living in this social classism. Literally, we are more social classed than any point in our history. And Anonymous they're notorious for being peaceful. They're notorious for standing up for things. They're notorious for targeting people using the internet. They downloaded the entire ISIS database with gay porn, and that's a huge insult to those guys. And it's funny. I wouldn't want to see it either. But still, and eventually other movements have been stopping out. The internet is full of countercultures. It is counterculture. It's where people express their ideas. You don't go for a major TV company. You go for your ideas. Individuality is the highest it's ever been. People are revolting in every way, spiritually, socially, and culturally. People are forming their own forums. They're starting their own communities. People are literally going off to Canada. People are starting their own communities within communities. There is entire countercultures waiting to happen. There's no unified wave. Everyone is going off in their own direction. And yes, we are living in a time where Trump is oppressing the American people, and Muslim hatred is higher than ever, to the point where we're even keeping out entire populations based on race from America. Which, some security reasons, it makes sense, but you're racially profiling an entire people. That goes against the American Constitution. We have a president who doesn't care about who highly disrespects the American Constitution, where the entire government is doing as a president sees. The executive power has gained too much power. And the internet is full of hate. It's full of people forming protests. It's full of people forming art. Art has gone up. Creativity is needed now more than ever. And as we destroy this planet, we look to resources from other planets. We look for genetic research, ways to cure diseases that have long since plagued humanity. We have the entire technological system to replace the entire economic world system we have now and completely destroy our need for oil and petroleum and replace it with an entire environmentally fueled self-sustaining economy where we could rely on nuclear power to an extent, yes, and we could literally make more efficient use of land. Entire sections of the planet could be left untouched. Alaska, the remaining rainforests and their populations, the remaining rainforests of India, the Congo and stuff. We can keep these places alive without destroying. We have the ability to create entire eco-towers where we can create entire farm systems within cities, and this entire economy could change the way the human race works, or the ability to cure diseases, not make racials to create Nazis, but to cure diseases that are holding us back, and more efficient use of land, more efficient ways of sustaining ourselves as a species. But the entire government doesn't want to allow this because such thought would destroy everything that gives them power. And now is the time for protest. Now is the time that we can either live in this age of war. And World War III seems more and more evident as North Korea and America clash it out. ISIS storms across the world in a wave of terror, and their armies fight against Christian and Jewish communities in the Middle East. And the entire Middle East has been torn apart in this cultural war. There's dozens of factions fighting, and people are on huge refugee movements, and probably the most spiritual moment in ever. People are mourning of spirituality. More people now than ever are flocking to spiritualities. This is a time where people are either hooking up, they're going their spirituality, or they're seriously thinking about committing to something bigger than themselves. They're looking for a way out. They're either killing themselves or they're looking for some form of purpose. And people are finding numerous ways to find purpose, and that is when you need a cause. That is when you need a revolution. That is when you need something. Another thing that's happening, and for the first time, in my opinion, the most progressive world leader, the only world leader that actually understands social views, even the Catholic Church, has drastically changed. It is drastically changing. People are proposing new ideas. They're becoming more scientific and more social. They're thinking about ways to help entire refugee populations. As more and more refugees flood to Europe, the Vatican is opening up their doors to these refugees, encouraging them to find safety and solace in their place. We are literally living in a time where we could change our entire culture for the better. Get rid of this culture of, sexually confusing people. Throwing everything in your face, Let people make their own choices, but don't throw everything in their face, We need to find a way to help people balance things and find who they are, and we need to help have a common cause. And the man I am most religiously, spiritually dedicated to, the Pope of my religion, made one statement not too long ago that changed, and many are talking about, it made me saying he should be he's probably the only world leader who knows what he's talking about. Why them, not me? We live in a social economy, social geological economy, where we focus on our needs and not the needs of others. And in a true society, we would be a system where everyone cares about others. We would have a system that's dedicated to the common cause of people and not for the economic growth of companies and the economic growth of the rich, where it's not focused on economic riches, it's focused on truly it's based on the benefit of the human race, where we can use sciences to propel human race forward, to cure diseases, to give people a choice of how they want, of giving their kids a better life and making them live a normal, healthy life, and not making them superior, but just giving them a chance to live and not live with terrible things. We live in where the future is possible. You're reaching out to Mars within the next decade. We could land people on Mars. We have unlocked interplanetary travel and, in some ways, colonization, really. And this is awesome to me. This is a time when the science we thought was so science fiction so long ago, could change the world. We could literally live in this peaceful, like almost like a Babylon 5 setting we always thought we could live in. But once again, it really comes down. Are we willing to do it? And this is the biggest part of counterculture, is the change of our culture and worldview itself. Our change on what is important in life, our growth and our economic and military growth, or the spiritual and human social growth as a species, where we focus on our intellectual and rights as human beings and just exist, live normal, healthy lives, and focus on our kids enjoying a better life than the ones we know. Not focusing on our own economic riches, but living, just existing, living, surviving, not prospering, not controlling, not dominating, not being empires, just surviving and living normal lives. That is the perfect form of life. And we could achieve, if science did all this. And like I said, the leader of my religion is encouraging people to help the homeless, go out and be active. You know, he's literally a diplomat. He's trying to end all these wars. He's trying to encourage people to help their common brother. There's this newfound age of peace and love and spirituality, what spirituality truly matters. We're starting to realize, get rid of all the dogmatic views and just focus on the true meaning of any spirituality in general, which is helping the less fortunate live a better life. And this is, the New Age movement has responded in certain ways that we are looking for a time of spiritual purpose and not some dogmatic view, but also secular thinking. I have researched these things on the New Age movement, which is a resurgence of spirituality in general. And there's this resurgence of people's ideas. There's this resurgence of people wanting change, of wanting a better life and not a life of war. And we're going towards World War III, but here's a chance. We end this age of war that's been going on for the past decades. That counterculture could do this, where each and every one of us can make a difference in every person's lives, and it's a domino effect. We change the world for better and end as much conflict as we can and live in a time of relative peace, kind of we haven't known in centuries, even, who knows. And I feel that this newfound wave of spirituality, and people are looking at spirituality as not a law, but a way to live a healthier life and not something that controls your life. And it's making sense. People are focusing on being kind and humanitarian and caring about one another and joining the Red Cross, going off and helping the refugee movements. This is this new age. It's not an age of hate. The counterculture we need now is not hate. It is love and peace, but mixed with firm action and going against everything our culture, that current culture goes for. That is counterculture, whether it be spiritual, social, or economic. Using sciences that change the very nature of how we perceive reality. And that's my take on counterculture. If I would run counterculture, I'd reintroduce a certain spiritual element, but I'd also combine the hippie movement with the Green Day, goth, music movements, and create this age of musical and cultural ideas to start a think tank. Go out and start a think tank in your local area. Gather artists, gather people, use YouTube as a way to, use TED, use YouTube, use Netflix as a way of bringing people together, create forums where people can share their ideas, go out in the community, think of ways you could start organizations within your community that can improve lives for everyone. That's what I would do. I would create self-publishing groups of ideas for artists who can share their ideas, create places where kids can come and think, and they could create learning centers outside school where kids can come up with artistic ideas, not just for games or media, but that can be used for purposes of showing you morals and purposes and telling you, getting ideas, but also create institutes where people from all over the idea, like a weird culture thing, build places in liberal arts communities like the one we got here, encourage people to think of ideas that could help people, like a publishing group for art and ideas and better life is what I would start. And use the internet to do this. Use the internet to connect people and create online businesses. Create online businesses where you literally sell ideas and use the concept of what's it called again? Startup. Your own startups are a huge thing right now, and you use that to create your own publishing for ideas. Think tanks for better worlds. Gather people in each college community, and colleges should think of ways they could create projects to improve life and the way people are living. That's what I believe in. Encourage, and we should destroy this image of what perfection is, and realize, how are we going about our lives? How do we do things that will improve lives of everyone for the better, in general. In closing, I think the greatest that inspired me to be counterculture was Green Day. Peace. Thank you.